Welcome to Optimal Game State. In the last few weeks, we've had a few interesting updates for Warcry. We had the new starter box, Crypto Blood, which does have some updates for the Crimson Court fighters. We also had a new FAQ sneak under the radar, which had a small but big change for the game. The quad rampage has been changed from a bonus move and attack to a bonus move equal to the value of the ability and then an attack. Rampage has always been the gold standard for quads, so nerfing it slightly does make sense. The change means we're more likely to use the other quads, which can only be good for the game. Interestingly, it does also benefit slow fighters who might be able to move further than they could normally. What we're here for today, though, is to look at the new rules in White Dwarf 490. This had 3 Warcry battle plans, but of greater interest, it introduced an optional rule for match play called Divine Blessings. Once the battle plan has been selected for each fighter in your warband, you can pick one blessing for them. Now, these blessings cost points, so you will need to account for them in your warband selection ahead of time, but it does mean you can switch between blessings to adjust to the battle plan. There are 10 blessings in total. 7 of these increase a characteristic, so that's move, toughness, wounds, attack, strength, hit damage, or crit damage. All of these increase the statistic by 1, apart from wounds, which gets increased by 4. The remaining 3 options let you use Inspiring Presence, as if you had a hero rune mark, take 1 free reaction per battleground, or give you an extra wild dice at the start of the battle. Each of these blessings cost points, but the amount of points they cost vary depending on the fighter. If the fighter has 22 or less wounds, they are considered to be a regular fighter, and you've got 1 set of points. If the fighter has 23 or more wounds, they are considered an elite fighter, and the blessing may cost more points. I can't understate how big a change this is for the game. It is of course optional, so we might have a situation where no one actually plays it. It's also match play only, so narrative players don't get it, but let's be honest, anything that's good for match play can make it over to narrative without any problems. Indeed, these blessings are a great way to add an underdog bonus instead of the normal extra wild dice. Maybe with each difference in reputation counting as 25 points that you could spend on blessings. To sum up the impact, I want to show some of the plots for fighters. There are over 1,000 fighters in the game currently. Now, the number shown there slightly overstates it, as I have split fighters into melee and ranged for different profiles, just so I can compare. Once you add in the blessings, we end up with over 10,000 profiles. Now, not all of those are going to be useful. For competitive play, we'll have to carefully study all the options to work out which of the new profiles are worth playing. To help with working that out, this plot is linked in the description, and you can play around with yourself and kind of explore and see what's in there. Interestingly, this does also open up a certain styles of warbands. Previously, if you ended up with 20, 30, or even 50 points left over, you'd probably shuffle things around to try to take advantage of as many points as possible. Now you have another way to use those points, while still sticking with the fighters that you really wanted. Of maybe more interest, if you're like me and enjoy working out profiles from models you have, this gives us more options. In a previous video, I went through some of the profiles for Hexbane's Witch Hunter's warband. If I were to do that again, I would definitely be tweaking the profiles with these blessings to get them to where I wanted to. They're only minor changes, but here we can see increasing the strength of that gun from 3 to 4 gets it a little bit closer to the badass that I'm looking for. In this case, I've baked the changes directly into the card, but do remember that you can have only 1 blessing per fighter, and you have the option to change things around. There are 10 blessings in total. We don't actually have to decide which ones to take until after the battle plan has been set out and we know what's about to happen. That could open up some interesting options. For example, if the victory condition is to kill the enemy leader, then we can use some of our blessings to make our leader harder to kill. If it's a treasure or a control objective, you might find getting some additional speed could help, and so on. It'll really depend on the battle plan, but it does give you an additional element of control, which can be very useful. I've put together some cards here. You can find a link to them in the description. These are designed to be the same size as your fighter cards. This means that you can lay the blessing underneath your fighter card and have the bonus peek out as a reminder. I have made a mental note to myself to update the object section on the card creator, so hopefully down the line you'll be able to make your own versions. For the rest of this video, I'm going to look at how the different blessings impact the pool of fighter profiles overall. So, to a certain extent, that is going to be focused on the competitive side of things, looking to see if there are any interesting options out there. Part of this, though, will involve looking at how those various blessings work, so hopefully it'll be of use to all types of players. First up, we have the Swiftness blessing, which adds 1 to the move characteristic of the fighter. It's 15 points for a regular fighter and 25 points for an elite fighter. When it comes to damage and wounds, we're not going to see any change. But we do have a shift at the most efficient fighters in the 4 move plus range. The top 5 would normally be Snurk Sourtongue, Prey Taker with Fanged Axe, Crusher, Head Claimer, and Proven with Great Axe. Adding in the Swiftness blessing suddenly adds lots of those normally 3-speed fighters. So it's now the Desecrator with Iconoclast Warpick with Swiftness, Graveguard with Great White Blade with Swiftness, then Snurk Sourtongue, then Desecrator with Statue Smasher Hammer with Swiftness, and Pain Fortin Last with Swiftness. So we're seeing a considerable jump. Now it's important at this point to understand how the points work. Normally as a fighter's points go up, so do their average damage and their average wounds. The other characteristics like movement and toughness, in my opinion at least, seem to be adjustments based on what the fighter should do. The important point here is if you increase the movement up like we have, the points will go up, but the damage and wounds will not. So the Desecrator with Warpick is going to move from 100 to 115 points when we increase the movement, but they aren't going to get the benefits typically associated with that upgrade. In this case, Desecrator is already doing great damage, and the 12 wounds really isn't that bad. Now, I'd normally look for about 3 wounds for every 25 points. So this fighter was pretty much spot on wounds-wise at 100 points, and is a little under at 115. Do keep this in mind as we go on. Obviously, for the larger fighters, for the elites, that's going to be less of an impact. In this case, we've gone from a shift from move 3 to move 4. That is pretty significant, as we know the 3 move fighters have been costed a little better to account for their slow speed. So if the discount is greater than the points cost to bring them back to move 4, then we're in with a bargain. There are a few other notable mentions in high ranks. In 6th place is the Paladin with Star Soul Mace and Swiftness. We then get Snurk Sourtongue again with Swiftness. So he's a little bit faster here, but because his points cost has increased, he's ended up dropping down the ranks. Further down in the ranks, at 19th, we have the Armature with Swiftness. He really looks like a good option. Personally, I've always been a fan of the Armature. He's been there from the early days with playing the Iron Golems out of the core box, but it was always a bit of a struggle getting him actually into combat. Move 4 fighters with Swiftness aren't dominating the top numbers for the Move 5 plus, in the same way that the Move 3 fighters did for 4, but there are a few notables. Again, we have Snurk Sourtongue with Swiftness in the top position. In 6th and 7th, we have the Crusher and the Head Claimer both with Swiftness. 11 to 13 has the Proven with Great Axe, the Slaughterborn with Great Axe, and the Prey Taker with Fanged Axe, all with Swiftness. I should mention at this point that I am comparing the no blessings with Swiftness for the time being. These rankings will change as we add in somewhat more damage boosts, which will allow the faster fighters to compete a little bit more. Next up, let's talk broadly about the defensive options. The 2 blessings in question are Resilience, which adds 1 toughness, and Fortitude, which adds 4 wounds. Both cost the exact same for regular fighters, with a few extra points for toughness on the elite fighters. This is nice as it allows you to switch between them depending on the enemy. When you're taking damage, there are essentially 3 scenarios. The defender's toughness will be lower than the attacker, it'll be the same, or the toughness will be higher than the attacker's strength. Shifting between one of these bands typically changes the average damage by about 1. That's a pretty broad generalization, but it's a good guide. When trying to decide whether to go for Resilience or Fortitude, the first question is if the change will shift the band. If gaining a point of toughness isn't going to make any difference, then obviously don't go for it. The second thing to consider is how many times your fighter is likely to get hit before going down. If it's more than 3 attacks, it's likely that the damage reduction from an extra point of toughness is going to be better in the long run. If your fighter is likely to die in 1 or 2 hits though, then getting those 4 extra wounds is going to be a big help. There are 4 blessings that impact damage. Ferocity gives 1 extra attack die, Might gives 1 extra strength, Brutality increases the hit damage by 1, and Savagery increases the crit damage by 1. I'm going to throw all of them into the pot to see what we get, but do be aware that I always look at toughness for targets when I'm considering damage. So the strength increase will be specific to that. Depending on your fighter and what you're facing, that extra strength bonus might be the best option, or it might make no difference at all, so be cautious with that. Still in the top position, we have the Graveguard with Great White Blade. We can see the Desecrators and Paladins coming in behind. I do think it's quite interesting that the Brutality, so that's where the hit gets +1, is performing better for the Desecrator with Warpick, while Ferocity with 1 extra die is performing better for the Desecrator with Hammer. The key element there, of course, is the number of attack dice. The lower they are, the better getting an extra attack dice is. If you already have lots of dice, then getting extra damage on hit is going to be better. It's a little while before we get down to Might, which is +1 strength, and that brings Snurk Sourtongue from 4 strength to 5 strength, where his 3 damage on a hit is going to pay off. Savagery, interestingly, does appear, although it's bringing the overall efficiency down, as while damage is going up, points are also going up. That said, it is only 10 points, so that's not terrible. We already know that the move 3 fighters are great, so let's shift out that slot and see what we can get at move 4. Snurk, again, is across the board fantastic. Probably should be looked at, I think. He has only 3 toughness and 10 wounds, though. So that 145 version with Might is very much going to be a glass cannon. That's still 10 damage on average, but it should go down pretty fast if it's targeted. We do have a few of the Swift fighters we talked about before. Then after all of the Snurks is the Crusher from the Ogre Mod tribes. Now he is up to 16.67 average damage, so that's off the chart. What's interesting here is we've already got a very expensive model at 245 points. Adding in 30 points isn't that much overall. It's only increasing damage by about 3.3, but the fighter is already chunky enough to not be worried about dying. The top charts here are dominated by the blessed fighters. Not really a surprise. If you're spending points on damage to the exclusion of everything else, then your damage efficiency is going to go up. Those fighters are also going to be easier to kill though. This Proven with Great Axe is doing some amazing damage for 155 points. It's like 9.3 on average. But it's only 15 wounds, when really at that level for points it should be over 20. If we ignore all of the other fighters with blessings, the Proven would be the lowest wounds of any fighter at that point break. Moving out of the damage category, we have 3 special options. The first is Destiny, which gives you an extra saved wild dice at the start of a game. That's 40 points, so you definitely need to know what you're going to be using it on. Normally you get 4 wild dice across an entire game, so an extra one is potentially a big deal, but I think 40 points is a bit of a stretch. So yeah, you definitely need to have something in particular you want to do with it. As I mentioned earlier, in narrative play you would get an extra wild die if you were the underdog. So this is actually a decent reference point. Previously I suggested 25 points for blessings for every difference in reputation. So you need a difference of at least 2 reputation to get 1 destiny, and a difference of 4 to get a second destiny. In narrative, if the difference was 5, you get a second one. So I think that 25 points per difference is probably a pretty good reference. The next blessing is Heroism, which lets you use Inspiring Presence ability as if your fighter had the hero rune mark. That's a triple that lets you immediately activate another friendly fighter after you finish activating your current one. It's only 10 points, so it's something you might consider if you had some spare points left over. I certainly have used this ability to win games, although that can be very situational. It's not something I necessarily recommend, but you do get to pick at the start of the game, so there will be battle plans, possibly, where it could be a good option. The last blessing, and perhaps the most exciting one for me, is the Spite blessing. It costs 30 points and lets you use a reaction without using an action once per battle round. So in narrative play, you do get a similar effect with the points renown. Often when I'm reviewing a new warband, I look at the reaction and I'll talk about how it's not really very good in match play and it's not worth losing the action, but that it can be good in narrative because you can get these free reactions. So this blessing opens up that option, which is really, really fantastic. At 30 points though, it is not cheap. Just comparing it to some of the other blessings, you could use those same points to boost 2 fighters by 4 wounds, or have 2 fighters increase their move by 1. So you'll have to give it some thought as to whether to take this blessing or not. So what can you do with it? We do of course have the 3 universal reactions: counter, take cover, and strike them down. Usually counter is the primary one out of that list, letting you deal back a chunk of damage to an attacker. Take cover is very situational, giving you a benefit against ranged attacks, while strike them down lets you do a little bit of damage if someone tries to disengage from you. Each warband also has its own reaction though, and that's where I think the real potential for this is. Chaos Legionnaires, for example, have Call to Arms, which will get them a free move for a friendly after an enemy strays too close. Skaven have a similar one with Musk of Fear, as do several other warbands. That's 30 points, but probably ends up being 1 or 2 free move activations over battle. I did take the time to read through the various options out there, and honestly, nothing really struck me as being super powerful, but there were lots of interesting options that have now been opened up. So it's a aspect of the game that's kind of new, and there's a chance for a little bit of exploration in there. There certainly might be some real bullshit combos, but if there are, we're going to have to go find them. That's everything on blessings. They appeared without much fanfare, and it seemed to just be a minor addition. The article in the copy of White Dwarf focuses on how they can help you when you've got a few points left over, but I think there's a lot more to them than that. Not only do they massively expand the pool of profiles, but they also present an option at the start of each game, giving players a little bit more control over how the game is going to play out. With the current set of battle plans for tournaments, which is heavily favouring swarm lists, I suspect these options might not initially have much of an impact. We'll have to see whether 4 Swift Graveguard are going to perform better than 5 normal Graveguard. Once we do switch to a new mission though, I think this is going to be a big factor. So personally, I am going to get some of these blessings cards printed out, so I've got them on hand when I need to try them out. I'm going to give it a shot. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. In particular, I'm interested in trying out a few of the lesser played warbands. Stuff like Fire Slayers, where all the fighters have Swiftness for a +1 move, or Daughters of Cain, where everyone gets Fortitude for an extra 4 wounds. The blessings are going to make everything cost more, but maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to work out that secret sauce that gets these warbands out of the cabinet and back on the table where they belong. So, how about you? Are blessings something you're interested in giving a go? Since it's an optional rule, would you be okay with your opponent using them, or would you prefer to keep the game a little simpler? If you are going to try them out, are there any fighters in particular you think would work well with the blessings? Please do post in the comments and let me know what you think about it. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible 2-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.